Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is determined to get on the ballot in 2024, and it will cost him. The super PAC known as American Values 2024 is backing the third-party candidate and plans to spend $15 million to get him on the ballot in key states. News Nation's Elizabeth Pran is live. So, Elizabeth, tell us, how much of an uphill battle is this?
Yeah, right, Nicole, it is a lot of work when we talk about the fact that here's a candidate that broke away from the Democratic Party, and when you're an independent candidate trying to get on these ballots, there are nuances. Every state is a little bit different. It's complicated. It takes money. There's a lot of legalese. But here's a campaign that is committed to getting on the ballot in all 50 states. And if you look at the fundraising, especially as you mentioned, American Values 2024, they have really outperformed every campaign in the third quarter, raising more money than former President Donald Trump, President Biden, even Ron DeSantis. So as you mentioned, AV 2024 is looking to dedicate between $10 and $15 million to get him on the ballot in all 50 states. We spoke with his campaign director just last night about really just how difficult this is.
The ballot access restrictions in this country are specifically designed by the two-party system leaders to keep out independent candidates. You know, these are the leaders who have utterly failed the American people for the last quarter century and want to be able to tell you cycle after cycle, you've just got to pick from the lesser of two evils. We just learned that we won our constitutional challenge against the state of Utah to delay the submission date for our signatures.
Okay, so why is that a big deal? Well, it is a big deal. It just shows you the momentum that you have. That suit that the Kennedy team won was delaying the January 8th signature deadline. But the group, as I mentioned, AV 2024, will also focus on at least 10 other states. We're talking Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, from California, Illinois. I mean, I could go on. The team claims that these are really complex election code states. There are higher bars set for an independent candidate. And in the end, the states will also fill at least half of the total signatures required for a nationwide ballot eligibility. And then there's this. The campaign really believes that Americans want an alternative. And if you look at some of the polling that we've done, even with here, News Nation, the News Nation desk poll shows that more than 43% of likely voters hold a strong or somewhat strong favorable opinion of RFK Jr. And almost 27% really closely identify as independent as opposed to Democrat or Republican, showing you that there is a voter bloc in this country who truly does not necessarily want the traditional candidate that they might be seeing on the November ballot. We talked about RFK Jr. appearing on our network. He will be joining Chris Cuomo tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's a great opportunity for viewers to get a better look at what's happening behind the scenes, the grassroots efforts, and really the momentum that the campaign has been seeing. As I mentioned, that third quarter raising a lot of money, outperforming every other campaign that we're seeing, Nicole. So people are paying attention.
They certainly are. All right, Elizabeth Pran, thank you. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
I got sober in 1983, and I had lost everything. I'd lost my job, and I wasn't practicing law, but I was putting together, I was doing essentially janitorial work, and I was putting together a field station for an environmental group called Riverkeeper up on the Hudson Valley that somebody had left us in a will, and we were making it a headquarters. And I was trying to be diligent and responsible, show up on time, and do all these, character building stuff that I had not done when I was on drugs. And so they asked me at one point to go, at one point I had to go, when we finished building the house, I had to furnish it. And in order to save my employer money, I found a furniture warehouse down in New Jersey. I borrowed a big pickup truck from a friend of mine to save the money. And I went down there and I put all of the furniture we needed. I had a list, I got everything we needed. And I put it like puzzle pieces, really perfectly fitted neatly into the back of that pickup truck. So that it was so tightly packed that there was no way that it could blow out. But I didn't tie it in. and I was driving up the New Jersey Parkway, and I hit a bump, and I looked in the bed of the truck, and it was empty. And all of that stuff was on there was splinters and foam rubber all over the highway. And I got out, and I don't cry, but I was just soul crushed at that time. And normally the way that I would have, during my addict days, the way that I would handle that pain was to go anesthetize myself, to get high. But I didn't have that choice anymore, so I just had to live with that pain and experience it, and without acting on it. And it's been 40 years since that happened to me. And I've loaded a lot of pickup trucks ever since then. And I always tie the stuff down because I learned the lesson, And when you're an addict or an alcoholic, the only thing you learn to do is anesthetize the pain. You don't actually learn from it. And we learn larger lessons too, which is that if you sit with the pain, it ultimately passes. And that our lives are like, passing through these valleys of darkness and then up on the sunshine of the Spirit when we emerge again. And that, one of the reasons that what addicts do is if they're experiencing pain, they have to fix it. So we reach for something outside of ourselves to fix what's wrong inside of us, to fill that empty space inside of us. And that's the only lesson you learn. And one of the reasons adolescents commit suicide is because when they're experiencing these dark places, they don't have enough experience to know that they're going to emerge in the lightness. That, they just imagine that their whole life is this twilight zone this grim twilight zone, and they can't ever imagine coming out of it. So they take their own life at that time, because what's the point of living like that, in that kind of misery? But as we grow older, we realize we always come out on that sunny side again. And what the Buddhists say, the trick is to learn to sit still with that and to be able to experience the pain ultimately with a level of indifference. There's a story about a Buddhist monk who was in
Former President Trump has formally asked the Supreme Court to overturn the Colorado Supreme Court's landmark ruling and reinstate him on the state's 2024 presidential ballot after he was barred on the basis of violating the 14th Amendment's insurrection clause. The Colorado Supreme Court has no authority to deny President Trump access to the ballot, Trump's attorney wrote in the petition. By doing so, the Colorado Supreme Court has usurped congressional authority and misinterpreted and misapplied the text of Section 3. The deadline to finalize Colorado's presidential primary ballots, however, is Friday. Now, it's unlikely the Supreme Court will resolve Trump's appeal before then, meaning that Trump will likely appear on the ballots since the Colorado ruling was put on temporary hold.
Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. weighed in on Trump's removal from the ballot. Let's see what he had to say.
I've been outspoken. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's, and that's why I'm running against him. But I think it's I've been outspoken about criticizing the Colorado decision and the Maine decisions because, we have a democracy in this country. We don't have a banana republic, at least we're not supposed to. People ought to be able to vote for who they want to vote for. I don't want to beat Donald Trump. I believe that I can beat him in an election and that I can beat him in a debate. And I want to do that fair and square. I don't want the playing field slanted. I don't want to have an election where you get rid of a guy who, a large percentage of the American public want as their leader, and you're going to leave those people feeling angry and frustrated and justifiably so. I've read the opinions. I don't see how they can stand judicial, Supreme Court scrutiny. I don't think you can get. Donald Trump has not been convicted of leading an insurrection. Maybe he did it, but he hasn't been charged with it. He hasn't been convicted of it. So you can't really. I don't think it's fair. I don't think there's due process. and punishing him for a crime that he was never convicted of.
Yeah, I really appreciate those comments from RFK Jr., not surprisingly. Frankly, I wish Joe Biden had said the same thing about his opponent. I think that would be very magnanimous. RFK Jr. wants to defeat Donald Trump and Joe Biden. He wants to debate them. He's doing well in the polls, topping 10% recently. That's very notable for a third-party candidate. We should probably spend more time at some point talking about his ballot access issues. I think we've had one of his surrogates on, Tony Lyons, to discuss them. We should go further into them because he's going to have some trouble himself getting on because the rules are very unfair to third-party candidates. I'm not faulting him or his campaign for that. It's the deep flaws in our system that is designed to protect the two-party duopoly. But yeah, I mean, he kind of outlines my own thinking about the decision. It is not to acquit Donald Trump of wrongdoing relating to the election or relating to January 6th, but just to point out that this is a subjective judgment somewhat, or a judgment that hasn't been rendered by a court fully of due process on whether Trump's actions, criminal though they may be, although that hasn't been proven yet either, are they criminal first? He's been charged, not convicted. And then are they, even if they're criminal actions, do they constitute an insurrection, is not a question for a unelected Secretary of State to arbitrarily decide.
Yeah, my objection here is only to the fact that I don't agree. I don't agree with Trump and I don't agree with RFK Jr. that the Colorado court doesn't have the authority. They have the authority to apply the constitutional rule against insurrection, just like they would have the authority to say a 12-year-old can't run for president or someone from Sweden can't run for president. Arnold Schwarzenegger can't run for president. But what the problem is that determination requires a finding of fact that has not, in fact, happened. Everybody is treating this like it's sort of a summary judgment posture. And in a summary judgment scenario, it is reliant on there being some clear, non-factual, indisputable facts on the record that you can make a decision on. You know, do we have a contract where I was owed this much money and this is the check that you paid and the check doesn't correspond to the money that was owed? We don't need a whole trial to figure that out. We can make a ruling in a pre-trial stage. This is a very different scenario where what is being alleged is a multi-week scheme that has over a dozen co-conspirators who are going to be called to testify to Donald Trump's complicity in all of this. It is very difficult for me to imagine that unless you're just looking at the fact of 1/6 and saying, oh yeah, he tweeted these and these people came to the Capitol and therefore that's an insurrection. Only with that mindset could you say that I'm going to be able to find that he, in fact, has satisfied the law here. And I think that's obviously what's going on. People are calling the acts of 1/6 the insurrection, which has always been the weakest part of Trump's case.
Shanna Bellows has very much leaned into that in her, I mean, in the documents herself, and then in her responses when asked about it on CNN and other places, has basically said, well, look at 1/6. There was violence on 1/6. That fulfills the criteria of the insurrection. But as we've pointed out, time and time again, you really have to dig into the scheme that went on in the weeks before. Associates wanting to, forge documents, hold meetings at improper times, meetings, those kinds of things. Where I think Trump is going to have a very hard time. Because he's going to be up against dozens of people flipping on him. You may, think that's totally unfair, but that's frankly just how the justice system works, and criminal masterminds have gone down for RICO-style things all the time, and Trump's going to be in quite a bit of jeopardy because of that. Now, I don't know, and I'm skeptical that is also what is meant by insurrection. But again, we're getting into a subjective kind of what does insurrection mean to you, that ultimately we need some kind of court body to weigh in on.
Right. Yeah. Well, meanwhile, a new investigation from House Democrats finds Trump received millions in payments from foreign entities while he was still president. Let's watch the news break on MSNBC.
Breaking news from Capitol Hill. There are new documents. They come from House Democrats showing former President Donald Trump received nearly $8 million from 20 different foreign governments while he was in office. I want to bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles. What more can you tell us, Ryan?
Well, Chris, I just left a briefing from Democrats on the House Oversight Committee where they gave us this report. It's a 156-page exhaustive report that details only 2 years of the Donald Trump presidency which they outline millions of dollars in payments that flowed directly from foreign governments into the various businesses that were controlled by Donald Trump and his associates. And now it's important to keep in mind that while Donald Trump was president, he did not do what other previous presidents have done and either divested his business assets outside of government or stepped down from the boards and stepped down from positions of authority in these businesses. Instead, he chose to remain involved in them. And even though his children did run these businesses, he was still directly involved or had knowledge of the day-to-day business activity that many of these different associated entities were doing while he was in office.
So according to the New York Times, among the countries patronizing Mr. Trump's properties, China made the largest total payment at $5.5 million to his business interest. Saudi Arabia was the second largest spender, shelling out more than $615,000 at Trump World Tower and Trump International Hotels. It does seem like these kinds of arguments were made in the past. I think when he was running in 2016, that there was an opportunity for all of these pay-to-play schemes, and he chose to not put up a Chinese wall, no pun intended, between him and some of these entities the way that people recommended, or Carter famously gave up his peanut farm. But even if you think
Trump
these
had a
are...
lot more than a peanut farm. Right? I mean, frankly, his business empire was so sprawling and so all around the globe, and he decided to remain in charge of it. There was no way to avoid this happening, given that he had decided not to
but you can,
step down.
If you want to keep your business interests, I think that's perfectly legitimate. You work your whole life for that, but then maybe you don't get to be president. And don't we expect some level of sacrifice from the people who lead our country to not be so easily entangled in these kind of pay-to-play schemes? Now, you can say that this is superficial. Not you, but
I'm not saying it's superficial at all.
One could say that this is a de minimis infraction, but given that Republicans have spent the last few years doggedly trying to make a direct connection between Donald Trump and for his foreign business interests through his son as proxy. I don't know. Sorry, Hunter, what did I say?
You said Donald Trump again.
Sorry, Hunter Biden.
But I knew exactly what you meant. We can finish each other's sentences.
Yeah, that's right, Robbie. But if you're trying to do it via Hunter Biden, I mean, how can you argue against when you think it's a big deal for his son to be a proxy, for Donald Trump to be himself entangled in this way?
Right, and by the exact same token, how can Biden-sympathetic mainstream media people be outraged about this and uncurious about the level of Hunter Biden influence peddling going on? The correct response is that there's tremendous corruption throughout our political system, and both parties and families are at fault.
With all due respect, the difference is that despite the Republicans' best effort to find something, there has been no smoking gun connecting any of Hunter Biden stuff with Joe Biden. So that is the substantive difference. Well, you can say that you care about this kind of corruption, and you would care if they actually found the smoking gun with Hunter Biden, but that's still up in the air as compared to what is being described here in the New York Times.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous level of verifiable influence peddling on Hunter Biden's part. Right. Whether it violates any law has not been established, and whether it makes Joe Biden guilty of any law. Yeah. Although this is also, I don't know if this violates some law. They should be prosecuted for it. But unfortunately, the check on this kind of corruption is maybe just ultimately the voters. So they can decide whether they don't want to reward Donald Trump or Joe Biden for these kinds of behaviors. More Rising right after this.
Answer. One last question, and then this conversation is to be continued, Bobby, because you deserve a platform on your poll numbers as much as the other people I'm giving platforms to who don't have the poll numbers. So when you want to come back, you can come back. People, the obvious question, it sounds like a layup, but it's a tough question. People say, I can't vote for this guy. He's not going to win, and he's only going to make somebody lose. Now, some Trumpers believe that it's him who's going to lose because you're pulling young people off of him because you make more reasonable arguments about some of the things they care about. And then obviously, as a Democrat, which is what you are, they're saying, well, he's going to hurt Biden, and it's so close, he could make the difference. How do you make peace with that?
Well, my numbers now are, as you pointed out there, the most recent poll has me at 24%. That's the New York Times Siena poll, which is a gold standard poll. Oh, my momentum is building. There were two polls over the past 3 weeks that had me at 22%. This most recent one has me at 24. I'm beating President Biden and President Trump among young people, people under 45. I beat them both. I beat them by 10 points on average, people under 36. I'm beating them with independent voters decisively. So I'm in a better place now than any independent candidate in history for 100 years. The last person who was in this strong a position was Teddy Roosevelt when he ran on the Bull Moose ticket.
Bull Moose ticket.
Oh, I think we also have the weakest two candidates running for president that we've had in history. I don't think that, I think personally, Chris, I'm not, I don't like to make predictions, but if I had to bet money, I would put the money on me and not on President Biden, President Trump. What is President Biden going to do? He can't debate me. He can't have an unscripted conversation or encounter with voters. I think the question, and he's losing to President Trump right now by 8 or 9 points.
The polling right now isn't good,
I think that question
is just a snapshot of a moment in time. We'll see how they go.
Yeah, of course.
Dusty's in my ear. A lot of people are calling into the show. They want to talk to you. Let's do another segment when it works for you. We're in contact with each other, and come back, take their questions, and let's see who you can persuade and who you can't. Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of News Nation's fact-driven coverage.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the volunteers and to the media to attend our press event today to make a very exciting announcement. I want to first introduce our volunteer state lead, Joe Cook. Joe Cook has led the ballot access here in the state and managed all the volunteers. We are so grateful to him. He's a professional investor. He graduated from Brigham Young University. He lives in Lehigh with his family. He's active in democracy reform, and he currently serves as a Braver Angels ambassador in Utah to help improve political dialogue. I'm Stephanie Spear, press secretary for the campaign. Thanks again for being here, Joe Cook.
Greetings and Happy New Year. Welcome to this important 2024 ballot access press event for independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I would like to acknowledge the volunteers in the room who gathered petition signatures for this historic independent run for the White House. Our journey in Utah began before Thanksgiving, fueled by a core team of a dozen volunteers. The momentum soared as we hosted a successful rally with Mr. Kennedy in Salt Lake City on November 30th, drawing over 500 local supporters eager to hear his transformative message. We were humbled to welcome visitors from out of state who were equally inspired. The number of volunteers who signed up to collect signatures swelled from the original dozen to over 100 individuals by the end of the rally. For 7 days following that energizing event, we hit the pavement, whether icy or not, tirelessly collecting signatures up and down the Wasatch Front. We gathered signatures in public spaces outside of jazz games, Ute and UVU games, bustling holiday markets, and various public libraries. Our volunteers braved the elements, canvassing in snow, rain, and freezing temperatures. These unsung heroes dedicated precious holiday hours because they believe in offering the voters of Utah the choice to elect someone committed to representing all Americans. Signatures came in from Cache Valley to the north, from Washington County in the south, and at least 14 counties were proudly represented in the signatures submitted. Many volunteers, driven by their passion, walked their neighborhoods or reached out to friends and family, contributing to this grassroots people-powered movement. Many voters who signed the petitions were thrilled to hear a message that unites us rather than divides us. I want to give a special thanks to Dina Kennedy, no relation to the candidate, who generously opened her shop, the Avenues on 4th, for those eager to sign petitions and drop off packets in Salt Lake City. To all the volunteers and supporters, I want to extend my heartfelt appreciation for your dedicated efforts. For those who wish to join us in growing this historic independent movement, we invite you to sign up at kennedy24.com. It is now my great pleasure to welcome to the podium our independent candidate for President of the United States, Mr. Robert F. Kennedy, Jr.
Thank you, Joe Cook, and thank you, Utah. Utah has once again shown that it is the pioneer state. It's the first of our 50 states in the District of Columbia that we are going to register and get on the ballot. I want to thank all these leading volunteers by name: Kirsten McIntyre, Jen Goodman, Dina Kennedy, Alex Arasigia, Sadie Lynn Ledbetter, Todd Husband, Larry Cook, and Jay Grunke. Thank you all very, very much. I'm going to mention that this morning that the campaign learned that 3 states are refusing to send us ballot petitions. And those are Maine, New Hampshire, and North Dakota. This is something that would never happen to a presidential campaign from the major political parties. And one of the side issues that I think has been raised throughout this campaign in many, many ways is the undemocratic lock that the major political parties have on this process. Most democracies in the world have a variety of political parties, but the Democratic and Republican parties have succeeded in this country in implementing a number of rules and procedures that make it almost impossible for anybody to challenge for any normal American, to challenge their chokehold. And we see this in many different ways across this campaign. Utah, in Utah, I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Henderson for cooperating and removing one of the unconstitutional barriers. So we were litigating this case at the same time we were getting signatures. These volunteers went out and beat the clock anyhow. So we got more than double the signatures we needed, and we got them on time, and we got them in this very, very short period when there was snow, there was sleet, there was very bad weather. The volunteers had to go out and persuade and go into public places, persuade passersby to take off their gloves and then to keep their ballot petition dry and to sign their names, even though they had shivering hands, in a way that was legible and matched their driver's license, because otherwise they were going to get challenged by the other side's lawyers. So they did a spectacular job of getting our campaign on the ballot in this state. Some of the states have rules that it's negotiating this labyrinth of these arcane rules that we now have in every state that are all designed to suppress dissent, to make sure that there are no options for Americans outside of the major political parties. 63% of Americans say that they do not think the Democratic and Republican Party are adequately representing the viewpoints in this country of Americans. And yet we're not allowed to. There's so many obstacles now put in the way to any narrative that does not conform with the corporate-owned political parties that are representing us in Washington, D.C. I'll just give you a couple of examples. In West Virginia, every state is different. And one of the problems is that we can't even figure out what the rules are because the Secretary of State doesn't know them. And the Secretary of State and the websites give information that is not correct. So we have to have an entire staff that is constantly checking, constantly negotiating, forcing them to put it in writing in each state. Some of the rules are extremely, I would say, extremely laborious and burdensome, deliberately burdensome. For example, in West Virginia, you have to register. It's just one state that does this, where you have to register in every single county in the state before you start collecting ballots at all. Massachusetts will invalidate an entire page of signatures if there's one stray mark on it. And that gives the opportunity for the political parties to disrupt our ballot access by actually making those kind of marks on the pages after a signature gather has gone up. Many of the states have rules that require notaries that affect that dictate minutia about the ballot. Signature gatherers, they have very constricted dates. For example, California requires 219,000 signatures in 15 weeks. So it's about almost 15,000 a week. New York or Texas, in 11 weeks has 113,000, so more than 10,000 a week. And they're arbitrary and they're capricious about how they administer it. New York in 2020 raised the signature burden from 15,000 to 45,000 without lengthening the window of 6 weeks. So again, it's all designed to keep third parties from getting on the ballot. We understand the system. We've had to commit. President Biden, President Trump are getting on the ballot for free. But it's going to cost us somewhere around $15 million to get on the ballot. But we're going to be able to do it. And in the end, we're going to have an army in the field of very, very capable people like the ones you see here. We're under leader, and we're able now to identify extraordinary leaders like Joe Cook. And we're going to, this process is forcing us to build our army now, and we're going to have a better army on the street in the trenches in November of 2024 when we need to get out the vote. And that, in the end, is going to give us an advantage in all of these states. So I, again, want to thank these extraordinary volunteers, and we're going to put you all on buses if you want to get on them and bring you to California and New York and sign up people there. I do want to mention that some of the ties that my family has to Utah. I came to Utah with my dad to ski, but I also came and ran the Yampa River in 1965 with him, where we learned to kayak. The first time when I was 11 years old, we visited San Juan County, the Navajo Reservation, went across the border to Arizona to Red Rock. In '67, we came back and ran the Grand Canyon with my dad. And Frank Moss was on that trip with us, who was very, very close to my father in the Senate. He was replaced by Orrin Hatch, who became my uncle, Ted Kennedy's closest friend in the United States Senate, despite their antithetical political views. My uncle, President Kennedy, considered his speech to the LDS community in 1963 when he was trying to push through legislation, the first treaty of the nuclear age the Atmospheric Test Ban Treaty, and it was considered to have no chance on Capitol Hill and was very unpopular with the American public. One of the first stops that he made was here speaking to a congregation, the LDS Church, and he got a standing ovation, and that turned the tide for the legislation that he considered the most important legacy of his term. I come skiing here every year. I did for many years my Waterkeeper Alliance fundraiser, the biggest fundraiser that we had at Deer Valley. And my son went to high school here in Utah, Winter Sports School. So I have a lot of ties to the state. I love this state, and I'm very, very grateful for the role that that these volunteers and the people of this state have played in this election process. So I'm very, very happy to be here in Utah. I'll be back in the state, and I'm very grateful to the state for this support. Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Questions?
So, Mr. Kennedy, while you're celebrating getting on the ballot in Utah, you raised a couple of challenges that you just learned about this morning. Would you care to elaborate a little bit more on that, how you learned all those challenges?
We're going to figure it out. You know, we have a litigation team now, and we expect to litigate in a lot of states. So, and we did litigate in this state. I'm grateful to Lieutenant Governor Henderson for, for shifting, for enlarging the window in a way that we think was compliant with the Constitution. So, these are roadblocks, they're obstacles, but none of them are insurmountable. We will be on the ballot in 50 states and the District of Columbia.
And do you care to comment on the situation in Maine in particular, that this morning Donald Trump also faces a challenge in Maine, and also the Supreme Court ruling that's pending that kind of leaves the whole question open as to who's actually on the ballot. You have a map there, and he's got one where he faces challenges too. I'm not sure which one's worse.
Yeah, I don't, I've been outspoken. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's, and that's why I'm running against him. But I think it's I've been outspoken about criticizing the Colorado decision and the Maine decisions because, we have a democracy in this country. We don't have a banana republic, at least we're not supposed to. People ought to be able to vote for who they want to vote for. I don't want to beat Donald Trump. I believe that I can beat him in an election and that I can beat him in a debate. And I want to do that fair and square. I don't want the playing fields slanted. I don't want to have an election where you get rid of a guy who, a large percentage of the American public want as their leader, and you're going to leave those people feeling angry and frustrated, and justifiably so. I've read the opinions. I don't see how they can stand judicial, Supreme Court scrutiny. I don't think you can get. Donald Trump has not been convicted of leading an insurrection. Maybe he did it, but he hasn't been charged with it. He hasn't been convicted of it. So you can't really, I don't think it's fair. I don't think there's due process in punishing him for a crime that he was never convicted of. It's not the American way of doing things. And I think as a strategy that it actually hurts the Democratic Party, because I think it discredits them and it makes President Trump kind of into this mythological figure because people can see that this is not fair. So I want to beat President Trump, but I want to beat him fair and square in an election where everybody gets to vote for who they want to vote for. you know where we expect to get it next?
Yeah.
Let me consult my expert.
So a few of those states were just added because the window just opened as of the 2nd of January. But we have been actively petitioning in Missouri, in Maryland. So it's likely that those may be the next states. Arizona is a state where you had to have all your electors certified prior to starting petition gathering. And we have certified all our electors, so now we're active in Arizona as well. Nevada's a new state that just opened up, as well as New Hampshire. And as we mentioned, we're waiting to get the petition for New Hampshire. And so, you know, one of those states will be the next one, likely Arizona or Missouri.
There are 24 states where we need to have electors before we can even start gathering signatures, and there are 27 states where we need a vice presidential choice on the ballot before we can start gathering signatures. So some of these states that are technically open are states that we, for those reasons, mainly because we have not chosen a VP yet, we're actively involved in talks with a number of individuals. But until we have a VP selected, we can't put them on the ballot. We can't get on the ballot in those states. We're not worried about that because almost all of those states have petition windows that go up to August. So we have a long time. The states that I mentioned are really kind of before the New York, Texas, California that have very, very difficult, and a few others that have very, very difficult ballot requirements and then short windows.
Have you officially filed for candidacy in Utah?
Yeah, we just had it stamped upstairs. I'll mention that we're very happy with our polling. The last 3 gold standard polls that have come out, the Quinnipiac poll, the Harvard-Harris poll, and the New York-Siena poll all show us beating both President Trump and President Biden in Americans under 45 years of age, and that's really a bellwether group. They also show us beating President Biden and President Trump among independent voters. And this year, for the first time in American history, that cohort, independents, is now the largest group of people in this country. More people self-identify as non-affiliated or independent than either Republican or Democratic Party. And then we're doing well in many, many other groups. Hispanics were very, very strong, and we're basically neck and neck with President Biden and leading President Trump. And you know, I think it was the Harvard-Harris poll shows us polling on average at between 22% and 27% in the key battleground states. And what that means is that we're within single digits of catching both President Trump and President Biden. What it means is if we get 10 more points, well, our average is 24%. If we get 10 more points, we could win the election. You could technically win the election with 34 percentage points because it's winner take all. And what that means is that all we have to do is take 4.5 percentage points from each of President Trump and President Biden to win the national election. So, and I have 11 months to do that, and we're very, very confident that that's going to happen. Again, thank you all very, very much, and to the volunteers. We are so grateful for all of you and for all of the hard work you did to make sure that Utah remains the pioneer state. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. You know, as you can see, we're ready for whatever comes our way. We have the field teams, the volunteers, the legal teams, the paid circulators, the supporters, and the strategy ready to get the job done. So 1 down and 50 to go. Thank you so much for being here.